you share an early artistic experience that changed you?
Of course. Well, I always had a really pretty rough upbringing. Just with money, it was always hard for us. I was born in Pomona, but almost immediately we moved to Ontario for a little bit. Back to Pomona, back to Ontario. Ended up in the high desert for a little bit. So we're moving around a lot. So keeping extra things like a lot of art supplies or really anything was kind of hard. But I remember it was probably 7 or something like that, and we were in an apartment in Ontario, and I think I was watching PBS, but in between the PBS cartoons, they would cut away to the symphony orchestra performing, just really intense, conductor waving his baton around, and just everyone's just super serious, cellos, just oh wow, that's really interesting. And that's whenever it kind of first turned something on in my mind. Where it was oh, I really want to play a string instrument. That's I'm feeling something, some kind of emotion from this snippet of maybe it was a Vivaldi song. Pretty dramatic, and it was really different than the home environment. Pretty much just kind of I had 2 siblings. We're pretty much just fighting all the time, or watching TV, or running around outside. So it made me interested in maybe a fine art perspective. I even as being that little, I remember I'm man, that'd be so cool. I just want to be with those adults making music. So it basically persuaded my mom when I was really young. The next year she bought me a violin, and we moved to Pomona, and I started playing violin at Lincoln Elementary. They had a string program for kids. So that was the first time where I decided that I really wanted to dedicate something into the arts, probably the earliest. Yeah, this was before I was even interested in visual arts and drawing. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's kind of one of the earliest memories that I have.
What are you saying?
Yeah.
I've been saturated in music, especially classical music, even before I was born. My parents definitely did the whole Mozart baby thing. So the first thing I ever came to know was to me, music was exposed as Vivaldi and Mozart and Tchaikovsky, but it wasn't actually until I'd say I was 19 and figuring out, oh, this is what depression's where I really rediscovered that music and kind of found it in a way that really made it my own. I did piano lessons as a kid, violin lessons, mostly out of parents being oh, you like this, you should do this, even though what I really wanted to do was create. But yeah, it was around when I was 19 where I finally started looking with my own eye and ear, and just kind of doing some research online about eventually finding more modernist composers that kind of struck finally a really, I would call it, as I called it in the Curious interview, a spiritual shockwave, if you will. Something that was really just cuts through. It wasn't just oh, this stuff that's fascinating to the ear. It was just something that just devastated and just cradled my soul all at the same time. I was just ooh, some stuff Bartok, it's filthy, and it's just man, this guy, you could hear the World War II going on when he's composing this, but it was then when I was just okay, I've kind of found a voice that I wanted to be a part of in a way at that time.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, so this is the part where I introduce everyone. I'm Frank Stockton, and I'm here with Rebecca Ustrell. Did I say your name?
Yeah.
I'm always I realized I've never actually asked how to do
Yes, that's pretty much how it's pronounced.
Ustrell.
Yeah.
And Sam?
Signer.
Sam Signer? Nice to meet you, Sam. So, Rebecca, you are the founder, publisher, designer, creative force behind Curious Publishing.
Yes.
Okay. That's awesome.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Can you describe what is Curious?
Absolutely. So, Curious Publishing is all-encompassing of several print projects that I've had in mind for quite some time now. The first being Curious Magazine, which is the quarterly art publication that I've done 4 issues of so far. And that is a compilation of art, both written, visual, conceptual, from artists throughout Southern California, but mostly in the Inland Empire. But another part of Curious that's really important to me that I've been building on lately during this whole year is producing archival art books of artists throughout the Inland Empire. So if you're a photographer and you've created these images but maybe they only live on Instagram or on your hard drive, I really think it's important to bring all that stuff to life in print. And I want to do everything from meeting the artists, talking to them about their projects, to creating a mock-up layout, and then creating like a serious deadline to get it to print and distributing it on the website and any art book fairs that I'm at.
So how did you first become interested in publishing?
Publishing was kind of always in the back of my mind. I've always collected art books, magazines, written poetry collections, small volumes, went to zine fests, and I write poetry and haven't really put it out there. I have a lot of different drawings that I always wanted to kind of see in one place and share with people without having to sell originals, things like that. And I actually looked into getting a couple of small volumes of my own work published or printed, and just from doing research, most people do it on their own. If you're an artist, just because it's too hard to get the attention of a big publishing company, it's expensive. So I was like, all right, I'll do it myself. But in that experience and realizing how little support there is out there, especially where I'm at in the Inland Empire, I wanted to be able to offer that to people. Even though I'm not necessarily, wasn't an established business yet or anything like that, I thought, why not? Why not just try it out and see?
Self-publishing.
Yeah, self-publishing.
So what was the first? We met at the LA Independent Art Book Fair earlier this year. Was it April?
April.
It wasn't that long ago, but I was really impressed because you had like a table filled with. I think you had your 3 issues of Curious, plus you had some publications, some small zines, publications by some of the artists that were interviewed in your magazine. And you had like merchandise, and I was just chatting with you, and you're like, oh, I'm from the Inland Empire, and I think that's cool because I teach in the Inland Empire. And but I was also impressed because there was another zine fest going on simultaneously in Pomona, and you had someone else doing that one for you. So
yeah.
I was like, whoa, who is this? Who is this lady? She's like, I don't know. I feel like I was like, she's building an empire.
Yeah,
I thought that was so cool.
It was Claremont Zine Fest. It was actually Sam tabling.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah.
You're the salesman, Sam. So I heard. So the LA Independent Art Book Fair. The only reason we got to meet was because it was very poorly attended. Because there were so few people there, I was like, turned to the guy next to me and I was like, "Can you watch my table?" Which he didn't. I didn't really need to say that. But then I walked around and started talking to people. It was actually kind of a blessing in disguise because, even if I had sold out my stuff, I would have made a little bit of money. But I got to meet a bunch of interesting people. But I thought, like, you're so fascinating.
Oh, thanks.
But one of the things, like, I remember looking at Curious, and it was kind of a very eclectic mix of different kinds of art. There was illustration and painting and poetry, but what really stood out to me was the thing that like really was exciting to me was the musical score that I guess now I'm realizing was yours, Sam. So how did the idea for the magazine materialize?
Sure. It's kind of like a long story and a short story, but generally, since I started buying art magazines, in high school, started out with the high fashion magazines, ended up being like me buying High Fructose and things like that, different types of magazines. One of my favorite ones was called Esopus, and it was really conceptual. They had like pop-up books in it, and then the next page would be like a music score sometimes, or sometimes it would be like a old diary picture, and it would be loosely based on an aesthetic. Maybe like the whole issue was about like brown cardboard and like concrete, and then the next one would be like vibrant paint or things like that.
Oh, wow.
So that being in the back of my mind, and then in the meantime, over the last few years, I've been coordinating different small art events. Like Claremont Art Walk, I coordinated a pop-up gallery that had 20 vendors for about 2 years. I curated at the Claremont Community Foundation for a little bit, and also just taking some art classes at Chaffey College. I've met a lot of different people from different artistic backgrounds. I foster relationships with my professors, with my peers, and it just kind of made me realize, like, I was looking through one of my magazines one day, and I was just like, I know someone that could do each different aspect that's in this magazine. Like, I know a musician that writes scores. I know a few poets. I know some visual artists. I'm a visual artist. I illustrate. I know a lot of photographers, and it kind of just all clicked. I was like, how could I, keep the momentum going, because my term for coordinating the art walk was up. It was kind of like a transitional period. I was like, well, what's next? What should I do? It was like, well, I should just try and see if people are interested and put some feelers out there. Like, would you guys want to be part of a magazine? Everyone said yes, pretty much, unless they were just out of town or not interested. And I just asked people to submit a couple things, and I was like, well, how can I make it more cohesive? And then I came up with the whole theme aspect, the first issue being Millennial Pink, which was the color of the year at the time. So I was like, that's something that's relatable. And
is it still? Wait, that was a year ago. So that was the 2018.
Yeah.
Is this the Pantone color?
It's a Pantone thing. It may have been a little bit older than that, but it was a trending color on Instagram.
It's still prevalent. It's all over your walls.
Yeah. So, and then also my feed at the time was just pink, 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 pink. I was like, okay, everyone's obsessed with this pink color. So am I. Let's talk about it. So that's how I kind of came up with putting all my connections into one magazine. And honestly, I was a little afraid of doing it, because I was like, am I just gonna kill it? This is all I have. There's all my friends. There's their art. It's over.
You're going to show everything that everybody did, and then no one ever has to make anything else again, because it's been put out.
Right. So that was my fear about it, but I was like, well, at least I would have done it. Let's go ahead and try this idea out.
Yeah.
But it turned out that there's kind of endless themes and ideas out there, and the community that I'm close with produces artwork quite often. So.
Yeah.
So there was a few artists that became the base of the first few issues that were in the first few issues at least once. And then it kind of just started growing from being online and people sharing it.
Yeah, I realized that you're kind of like a linchpin to the artistic. Or maybe, I don't know if you think of yourself that way. I get the sense you don't, but...
I try not to, but it's kind of true.
Let's be honest. Here, have some more vodka.
Yeah. Drink that.
No, it's really cool. That was one of the things that was exciting to me, because and we mentioned this before, but so this was the 4th issue of Curious just came out, and you asked me to do an interview for it, and you were like, I'm gonna have my photographer Christopher Lawrence Baird show up at your studio at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. And I'm just like, oh shit, I know so many creative people that talk a big game, but they don't show up. And it was weird, because we all were, you were at my studio at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday, and so was I. And all 3 of us were shocked.
We're wow.
Wow, creative people
Look at us.
that got up on time.
Being type A.
Yeah, I feel like that's so rare, but that was one of the things that was so magnetic about you, is the ability to both be creative and then also be kind of an adult and go out there and do stuff, and
sure.
It's risky to put together a publication and put it out there. That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is who gave you permission to publish your own? Who gave you permission to do this? Where does that come from?
I just kind of been ballsy about most of the moves that I've made in life. Not that they're huge steps, but I made the leap and be like, oh, I'm going to talk to this professor who's 20 years older than me, who's probably bored while he's teaching this class, maybe, but I really needed to know what was going on in the world. With one of my mentors, Chet Glaze, he's a painter and is out of Riverside. That's actually one of my early art like moments too. Is being in his class and just really connecting with how honest he was about the way he would go about creating work and how much he actually took the time and care to talk to his students. I pretty much would like invited myself to talk to him a few times after class. Like, okay, now can you explain to me again, like when you started painting, what kind of like matte medium do you use? How do I make a canvas? Things like that. So
you just started interviewing your painting teacher.
Yeah, basically about his life and how he got to where he was, and little steps like that. Like, well, okay, I like magazines. How do I print a magazine? I Google it. I'm like, what does perfect binding mean? What does saddle stitch mean? How do I create, the page number? If it's laid out like this, I taught myself how to graphic design, and so it's just kind of like natural for me to be like, well, now I'm just gonna I'm just gonna publish my magazine because I can.
Yeah.
And what's the worst that can happen?
What is the worst that can happen?
Rejection. But I'm used to that too.
Lose some money.
Like I, in a need for money, a few years ago, took on a full commission sales job. So
yeah,
that kind of background too really toughens your skin about straight up rejection. Like, no, I'm not going to give you this money. Okay.
And then
you just keep trying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So cool.
I mean, it kind of like killed my soul at the time, but like it shocked me into reality of like, this is what's out there. Like, people aren't gonna like you. People are gonna really like you maybe, or maybe you're gonna like really help someone out. That kind of thing. So
and just
it was worth helping those people's moments where I wanted more of that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And how do you? So was your first experience in publishing anything curious? Did you start from zero, or had you like interned somewhere? Or
I didn't start from zero, but I didn't have that much experience in media or publishing before Curious. So Curious started last year, so my first experience in any kind of media was probably, must have been early 2016. A friend of mine, he goes by Ernst, his name's Ernest Valdez. He does this podcast and media streaming YouTube about food in the Inland Empire. And he had a friend with a magazine. It's called Cali Focus magazine.
Cali Focus?
Yeah. It's based out of Upland, and they mostly cover music festivals and food throughout the IE. And he introduced me to her because he was like, I've seen you went to a zine fest. Like, they went to a zine fest. I don't know, maybe you want to like meet them because they also do magazines if you're interested in that. And I had met Ernst at Chafing in 2012. Known him for a long time. We had a sculpture class together. So he connected me with his friends at Cali Focus, and they were just asking. We were having a drink at when it was still Dale Brothers Brewery. It's called Last Name Brewing now.
Last Name Brewing. Last Name Brewing.
Yeah, they do Pomona Queen. Okay. Yeah, anyway, that's sort of like big beer. So we were drinking at Dale Brothers when it was still Dale Brothers and talking about what they do, they get into concerts, free stuff like that. I was like, that's cool, I'll go to a concert for free and take some pictures. I have a camera. Just kind of joking around, like, okay, you want to? And I'm like, sure. So I did some freelance work, basically intern work. Like, I didn't get paid for it, but was getting these free concert tickets to shows at like the Regent in LA, things like that. Yeah. And did a couple of recorded interviews for them and some pictures. So that was my first exposure, was getting into their magazine, which is a print magazine, with a interview credit. And having that kind of like press pass at one of the events, there was also someone from KSPC, or no, it was
KSPC?
It wasn't KSPC, it was the radio broadcast out of Valley College. It's not Virginia.
Okay, do you know what that is?
KBCR?
KBCR.
KBCR?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a PBS off-branch, or NPR. It's both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they saw me at an event that I was at, representing Cali Focus, and then asked if I wanted to do some freelance work for them. So I did a couple of things for them. The main thing that I did was I interviewed Kamala Harris, which was just a recording that had a prompt. And it was just a in-person media day where she was surrounded by a bunch of media people, and I was one of them.
What's the term for that?
Press day.
Like a junket? No, a junket is when they go from one to one.
Right.
I don't know
the name for it. There is a name for it.
They call it the shit. I can't remember the word. Whatever.
Yeah. So at the time, I also had a full-time job, so I would ask my full-time job people if I could just clock out to go to these things for the opportunity, and they were okay with it.
Oh, wow.
And I was in fundraising at the time for foster children. That was
Okay.
my career. So it was just one day, towards the end of the day, I was like, can I leave early so I could interview Kamala Harris? And they were like, we're not going to say no.
Yeah,
Right.
you can't say
Of course. Like,
that's such an awesome opportunity.
it was
So,
awesome.
You got to ask questions?
Yeah, and it was about the job market and how this college that we were at, it was a tech college, was going to open up the opportunity for training for new jobs in the Inland Empire. So I don't remember anything more specific than that because
You
it was
remember her
honestly
answer?
pretty like. I mean, I have it recorded somewhere.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Just, how was it?
It was just kind of crazy. It was just like, that's Kamala Harris, and that's your voice and your hand.
Yeah, it was kind of nerve wracking, but I was surrounded by like old dudes who have been in TV forever, so they were like honestly like seemed annoyed that they were even there. But I'm there like, this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Wow, I get like a folder and a pass.
Right.
That enthusiasm is good. Though.
Yeah, so that was my. That's where I got the balls to be like, well, I better just do it myself because Cali Focus stopped producing shortly after that. They were producing again, but they like took a break, and they had been out for like 5 years, and it wasn't doing that great because they are a free magazine. They run off of ads, so the market wasn't great, and they didn't need my help anymore. And now I was getting all these inquiries from KBCR if I wanted to do stuff under Cali Focus, but I didn't have that anymore. It's like, well, I'm not part of a media thing anymore. I didn't want to lie about it for the opportunity, so they're just like, okay, well, let us know when you get back in the industry. You know?
Yeah. So you're like, I'll start my own and be immediately back in the industry.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I wanted my in back into it.
And so that's that was what gave you the idea to start, or that kind of maybe catalyzed the Curious.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so Curious is focused. Is it focused on the Inland Empire, or is that just kind of the starting point? How do you think of it?
It's a starting point. Definitely. I want it to reflect a lot of IE artists, and it's kind of like an underlying known thing about me. It's like I wanted the first few issues to mainly focus on Inland Empire artists. Not only because that's who I know, but I just think that there's just definitely not that much exposure out there.
Yeah.
And people aren't bringing that level of importance to independent artists out there at all that I can see. I mean, except for recently with zine fests.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just not enough.
Yeah, zine fests are cool.
They're cool. They're cool, and they're a way to like learn a little bit about an artist. But I think I wanted it to seem more important, more valuable than that. So, seeing meeting these IE artists that live in San Bernardino, and it takes them a long time to get to a show in LA, and they feel like the arts aren't that important, or not seemingly as important. Getting to print in my magazine is kind of a big deal for them, even though I consider myself, I'm very beginner, but like even seeing their appreciation for that, like I think it kind of reinforces them doing the right thing.
Well, yeah, you're 4 issues in, and you're not like super beginner, and you come to the table with a whole bunch of organizational skills and publishing skills and design skills. You kind of are like you're like just one person that's able to. You have a vantage point where you can see a lot of different. You can see a lot of the language. What's that?
I'm a Swiss Army woman.
Swiss Army.
That's good.
And Sam, where do you come in? When did you start helping out with Curious?
I mean, we've been close, Rebecca and I, but I remember the time when it was an odd transitional period. I remember it was after the Pomona Zine Fest, where I heard little whisperings from me like, oh, I could start a magazine, or in fact, you've probably mentioned it at some points, and to me it was just, that seems like a natural and like oh yeah, you'd be great at that kind of idea that you've brought up. And then I remember one day you were just kind of really just starting it, just doing it, just being like, okay. I think you had kind of like one of those little layouts you do for your zines where you just fold like the paper in half, and you're kind of, I saw your amoeba drawings that became the cover of the first Millennial Pink issue, and then I think it was you that was suggested that like, do you want to write a piece of music for it? And I was like, absolutely, sure.
Yeah.
And that ended up kind of starting off a huge chain reaction for, at least for me, for composing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Can you explain?
yeah, absolutely. I touched a little bit on this on my interview itself in the magazine.
Uh-huh.
For the longest time, I've been like really interested in the idea of synesthesia, you know, color and sound relating to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little bit directionlessly like obsessed with the idea of like taking a 12-tone color wheel and connecting that to like the 12 different, you know, keys and, you know, the scale. And that's how the first version of the Millennial Pink piece started, but it really wasn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I decided just to pretty much adopt the subtractive color wheel, which is the logo for Curious,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to use that as a model.
Mm-hmm. The subtractive color wheel being red, yellow, blue.
No,
it's
this
like CMYK and
Yes.
RGB and then
Black.
K.
Okay, the printing.
Yeah, the printing one.
CMYK.
Yeah,
Oh,
CMYK,
okay.
yeah.
I don't know. I felt it was a little bit more abstract. Like there was a little bit more room for interpretation.
Yeah.
And so you know, it was just it happened to be that the first one was like pink in color, and it was like, you know, working with this thing I've been obsessed about, like somewhere in the space in my brain. But and then when you were talking about maybe in the weeks when I was like finalizing that composition, you were talking about future issues like revenge and biophilia. I was like, wait, I can see this being an entire thing. And so now, yeah, I've composed 4 of the 7 pieces of what is going to be a 7-piece piano suite called 7 Curious Pieces.
Oh, wow.
So so I'm working on the 5th one right now. I have ideas for the last 2, but yeah, they're coming in together really well.
And what's the plan once you finish all 7?
To record them, to perform them, to have a nice little printed book like this that has all my scores in written words.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with the biophilia piece, Kuan Yin, who is a shamanist, does, let's say, an emotional alchemy training program that I've been taking a part of recently.
Mm-hmm.
And it has helped my writing, and the writing's helped. It's the more that by the time I wrote the 4th piece for Saudade, which I have to admit was my most personal one, it became really apparent that it was more than just me writing, you know, pieces based on different themes, and I'm going to have a collection of them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I tried to look for an outside concept, and I was just one day bored in class, and I was like, 7 pieces, 7 chakras, and I was like, wait, every one of these pieces kind of seems like a journey further inward and like kind of a weird metaphor, but also a step towards my own healing. And so that was actually a pretty recent realization about like 3-4 months ago.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, I might do a little bit of I'll have one book that just has the pieces and the little blurbs I put in each magazine, and a second one that'll be, I suppose, an emotional essay, if you will, of also some like stream of conscious poems for each piece, just kind of like to show the formation or the honestly not too easy but very necessary emotional process that comes in to me actually writing these.
Wow.
They don't come too easy, but they they're like it's something.
Yeah, so what he was saying about Kuan Yin is he may do a joint performance with her.
Yes.
She does synths and vocalizations that are all based on emotional alchemy. That's kind of the theme of it.
Yeah.
So since his pieces are based on the themes which have to do with emotions and synesthesia and color, I kind of thought that curating some kind of show with them together might be good.
Yeah.
Especially since he's been partaking in forces and things like that. That might be coming up in a couple of months. I'm actually meeting with her after this.
Yeah.
About it.
Wow. Today?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't distract you for too
Oh
long.
no.
But
That's scheduled.
so
We like to work.
So as far as the themes, so you've published 4 issues of Curious.
Yeah.
And you've done 4 scores. The score was actually what really got me excited about the magazine initially, because first of all it was DIY, which I think DIY is cool as fuck.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you know, I feel like too many talented people sit around and wait for, I don't know, wait to be picked.
Right.
And I just think that's boring. But and it also feels like it's just, I don't know.
A little sad.
Yeah.
It's sad you're waiting to be lucky. And I mean, but then on the other hand, like you doing your own like sort of curating your own magazine makes you the picker, kind of makes you the person that is making other people lucky. But anyway, that aside, I was looking through the magazine and I liked that it was completely self-published. And I could see that there was poetry and illustration and painting, and then when I saw the musical score, I was like, "Whoa, this is cool!" Like, I can't read music, but you know, it was just another type of just a more eclectic mix of the arts, which I'm a fine artist by trade, and I'm a former illustrator, and I have interests in film, and I like listening to music. I tried to teach myself guitar for a little while, but you know, it's exciting to see all that stuff kind of coming together. You know, that I'm not the only person that likes a lot of different things.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like we live in an age where everything is so. I mean, it's good for it's things are so specific, geared towards, like, we can only do not only musical scores, but like these are guitar scores for left-handers, or whatever.
Right, and I agree with that too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, where can I get a little bit of everything, or along those lines. Like I want to, not only, but I want to reach a broad audience and get maybe people that aren't used to just seeing music scores, that maybe they bought the magazine for the illustrations in it, but now they get to read some written poetry and see that there's an original composer that lives in Upland. You know.
But that idea of Upland. So, but the thread that ties things together is not that it's like just the arts, but it's like there's a geographical aspect to it. It's like it's Southern California, specifically Inland Empire, and I grew up in and around the Inland Empire, and you know, as someone that teaches at Moreno Valley College, I'm always trying to get my students to see kind of the power that's at their fingertips, you know, to reach, you know, to do things that reach beyond the Inland Empire, which is, it's, you know, give something back, but also kind of show off a little bit. So what are the four issues so far? What were the themes?
So Millennial Pink, and there was Revenge, Biophilia, and then this latest one is Saudade.
And you were telling me Saudade is Portuguese.
It's a Portuguese word for a feeling of deep longing for a lost something, usually love, and also a feeling of nostalgia for a lost time. So, according to everything that I've researched and read upon, there's not an exact translation for it. It's a very Portuguese term, but it's just something about the ambiguousness. Also, you can be really specific with it. Gave me the feeling that a lot of people would have, you know, a lot of my artist community would have something to say on the subject. So that's kind of how I picked the topics. The most, the hardest one to sell to artists to submit to was Revenge. And I think that's just because it's so hardcore for such, you know, it's kind of wishy-washy times where you don't want to say the wrong thing, you don't want to feel too strongly about something negative, that kind of thing. So, but I went for it, and then I went for it with the revenge thing because there's so many themes of revenge in old art that I just was interested in at the time. So I was like, you know, I'm just gonna do it and put it out there.
Oh, wow. So what are some lessons that you've learned from doing these sort of calls? Would you call them calls for entry?
Yeah. It's like an open call for submissions.
Open call for submissions. And like, what are some of the things that you've learned in you know, reaching out to the general public?
Well, there's a lot of different things that I've learned. The main over-encompassing thing is that there's no two artists that are the same, and most people are really careful about how they're portrayed, even if they've never been in print. So I've noticed that I have to be really transparent and open about my process with how I go about picking what it's going to look like in the magazine. I have to kind of I have to consider everyone, you know, not just my friends. Yeah. And then I have to figure out what's going to go in and what isn't going to go in, and that's a hard lesson because I'm kind of restricted by my print budget, which means page number. So the first issues were really easy. You know, I just basically put everything in that was submitted so that it could be a full magazine. But now I'm starting to get different.
You have to edit.
You know, I have to edit out. I have to make sure that the person is, I don't want to say serious, but serious enough. And they have something established before I put them into print.
You can say serious.
Yeah, yeah. You know, like, do you have an Instagram at least about your process in the arts? And
so it's not just like
this guy made a painting and he lives next door to me and I think he's cool.
Yeah.
He drew something on the wall. You know, there's a place for stuff like that, but I want it to be like. And I hate the word networking, but I want it to be kind of like a jumping point for networking for artists that are starting out. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I like putting in more professional people and people that are just starting out in their career, so that there could be people like you that maybe take more of an invested interest in like the young arts community, but also like those young artists. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
I mean, yeah.
Open-ended, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you asked me to be in the issue Swadage, because you saw a deep longing or nostalgia in my work.
I did. And my first exposure to any of your work was Double Jointed Spiral, which was very existential, longing, questioning, themes of love, maybe, lust, whatever, like anything really. It was kind of a stream of consciousness, and it got a lot of different feelings going. And then also I was just really interested in your work and how you were willing to talk to me, so I wanted to somehow marry it. I was like, I don't want to lose contact with him. There's nostalgia all over this Double Jointed Spiral thing, and then it turns out that's also a theme in some of your work. Yeah. You know.
Well, I mean, Double Jointed Spiral is just a part of it's a work unto itself.
Right.
You know, it's not a painting. It's
sure.
But it kind of is. It's a piece of. It was an experimental book that sort of takes on the same structural format as my last show, which was at Dink Gallery downtown. Anyway, I had been writing the whole time while I was making this show, and it was like there were 92 canvases all on the same wall. It was kind of confusing, and it was all like a logic of everything goes together, and it all bleeds together, and you don't know where one painting ends and the next one begins, and the writing was kind of approached in the same way. But that's what Double Jointed Spiral came out. It was like my notes. I would come in before I painted and like just start like type a page, and then when it was done, I like edited it all together and put it together so it had some sort of, again, like just like the show, like an abstract kind of thread, or like it felt like it had a shape to it. It had a shape and it had a trajectory that I couldn't. It's hard to describe. But I organized it by color, so I can really say it's organized by color.
Right.
But anyway, Swadage came out. Issue number 4 came out in early June. Is that right?
Yeah, June. June. Well, it premiered end of June.
That's right. Yeah. And you put together like a big festival. Where was that?
Yeah. So we did our release party at DA Center for the Arts in downtown Pomona.
DAS? D-A-S?
DA. So it's D-A.
DA Center for the Arts.
So everyone calls it the DA.
Right. DA. Okay.
So the DA doesn't stand for anything. It actually has to do with like a sign that was left on the building a long time ago, and only the D and the A were left, and they just kept it. Well, at least that's what I heard.
Okay. It's like CK
It's like one of those urban legends. Lowercase D, uppercase A.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And how do you do a release party for every issue?
Yeah. So
was that like from the beginning you knew to do that? 'Cause to me, like that's like I wouldn't have thought of doing that. That sounds.
Yeah. Since issue 1, issue 1 was released at Graber Olive House. It's a historic olive canning facility that's still being used. But I made that connection with the new owners through a Chamber of Commerce meeting whenever I was the young professional chair at Claremont. So that was one of my many like public roles whenever I was in fundraising. I was networking with people. And yeah, I wanted to keep the release party format so that there was a little bit of hype and importance drawn to this publication, and also another reason to throw art shows. I mean, I always want a reason to get artists together.
One of the things I really liked about the show at the Dock. Well, it was a little later in the afternoon. I would have liked to have taken my son back and my wife.
Sure.
It was past his bedtime, but it was intimately scaled. You had like bands going on. You had food and you had drinks, and you had like a small number of tables, but it felt curated. That was what was cool. So like a normal book fair has, I don't know how many vendors, 100 vendors or something, 100 vendors, and this was like
20.
15 or 20, and it felt very curated, and it felt like I had I was able to actually go to every table, and I try to buy stuff at most tables, but if I didn't buy stuff at every table, but I try to buy a lot of stuff, because it's fun, and but anyway, it was really nice. I like that aspect of the release party.
I'd say it was every release party gets better. I think, and I do get that feedback too. Like, wow, this is better than the last one.
Yeah.
I'm like, I hope people don't stop saying that. It's
We'll reach a plateau.
I put the same amount of effort into every release party I have. It's just that, of course, as I'm building this magazine empire of artists, the quality of people that are involved goes up, and they tell their friends that are maybe clothing designers or ceramicists, or maybe I meet some new artists along the way, and the artists that couldn't show up are replaced by these new artists, and because it can't get everyone that's interested all at the same time, especially 4 times a year. So it gives an opportunity for all those artists that know about me to get a chance to be part of the show. And another reason why that show was so particularly well put together is I've gotten big enough that I'm sponsored by a nonprofit fiscally. So they give me a nonprofit status under their umbrella. It's called the Arts Area, and they have internship programs, and they have hired on 2 interns for me. One is in event coordinating, so I had my intern Amanda helping for event coordination, and then Jessica, who helped me edit the magazine.
Wow, so you've got some people helping
me out now.
Helping you out. That's incredible. And so you didn't have to do anything, or what did you have to do to get that nonprofit status? It was just you hooked up.
Well, they actually approached me.
Oh wow! How did they find you?
They met me personally. His name's John Machado, who's the founder of the Arts Area. He met me. Machado.
Yeah. Chairman of the Arts Area.
Yeah, he's the founder and the CEO.
Is the Arts Area Inland Empire focused? Or?
Yes, it's specifically promoting anything in the arts in the IE, and he's a professor at JP.
Okay.
In art history. So he met me when he was walking around doing the Claremont Art Walk, which is like a 15 location map in downtown Claremont for Saturdays, and I was volunteer curating at the Claremont Community Foundation, and so I was at the door greeting and standing.
Cool.
Let me know if you were interested in buying a piece, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you were working it.
Yeah, I was working it, and I met him there, and he's just like, wow, nice to meet you. I'm with the Arts Area. We're trying to build our website. They've only been around for a little over 2 years now. It's like, so if you can get the gallery registered onto our website and make an artist profile, we're growing this network where it's a shared calendar, where you want to do e-blasts of exhibitions going on in the IE and really grow it, So he knew about me from there, and I kind of explained to him my background in the Claremont Art Walk pop-up gallery and how now I'm doing the Claremont Community Foundation, and that I'm an artist. So I just kind of stayed on the radar, and then he invited me to one of the board meetings that was about event planning, because he knew my background in event planning. He's like, I think it would be good if you were part of the roundtable discussion for our pop-up gallery we're thinking of doing in Ontario during the Ontario Art Walk 3rd Saturdays. And not that many people showed up, maybe a few people, like half of the people invited showed up, but I just kind of volunteered myself to run the pop-up gallery when they were talking about it, because the board members all had full-time jobs, and they were trying to figure out who they could get as a student to coordinate it, but from their experience, students are usually too busy to do these kinds of things voluntarily. And I had some time because I wasn't doing the Claremont pop-up gallery anymore.
Yeah.
And I had this contact book of like 150 artists by then.
Yeah.
That knew me personally, and I kind of established relationships with. And I was like, well, I think that I can throw your first pop-up gallery and get at least 15 artists for the next couple months. I think that's enough time. And they're like, okay, do you want to be our event coordinator? I was like, sure, why not?
Sure. Well, because again, it's like it's so rare for someone to be. I mean, I think it's somewhat rare for a person to be like organized and creatively inclined. They
Sure.
don't always go together. Usually they are separated.
Agreed. Yeah, so I think I just got on their radar that way. That's how they knew who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of on the side on my Instagram asking people to submit to this magazine that didn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so John asked me if I wanted to meet with him to talk about the magazine idea. And the meeting was kind of him being afraid that I was going to break some laws at my release party. It's like, well, you're saying you're going to have alcohol, but do you have a permit? Like, you need to know these things.
Yeah.
He didn't know that much about my background in event planning and fundraising, which I already knew these laws. And I was like, no, I know you need a permit. I know how much it costs. And I've thrown events before. And he's like, oh, that's great. Like, I thought I was going to just be telling you, like, be careful. Don't do this, or what do you mean you're a publishing company? Are you legal, or what is going on?
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's pretty loose-ended. It's not a professional publication. It's like a really, really fancy zine, if you want to call it that.
Well, it looks like a professional publication.
Right.
How many pages is Curious?
Sauvage is about 76, but the first issue of Curious was about 36.
36, so you a little more than doubled.
Yeah, it's doubled. So yeah. So he basically had back to John. Part of the arts area, they were at a position where they were ready to start taking on projects, which is part of their mission, is to fiscally sponsor other projects. And he asked if I would be their guinea pig for their first project, like so they can learn the ins and outs of the accounting side, contracts, things like that.
Do you have an idea where Curious is going? Like, what's next?
Well, right now I'm focusing on growing distribution throughout SoCal. But I think the next step is that we're going to be producing not only Curious magazine, but small releases of artist books and collections of their artwork.
Yeah. So I saw Eyesore.
Yeah.
Is that the first one?
That's the first one. It's kind of like my experiment in creating kind of like a graphic design project, because I'm traditionally just I use India ink markers and I do erotic illustrations for like 90% of my personal artwork. But I also play around with words, poetry, and a lot of themes in my work are about like relationships and breakups, and I needed a way to vent out some like frustration about that. And I really like how the old like Microsoft aesthetic is becoming a thing in design.
Like the sort of
lo-fi 8-bit or
like
16-bit
gradation, like bold rainbow gradation.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because like it's kind
of amateur looking. It's like it's amateur, but now it's ironic.
Yeah, so I wanted to use that juxtaposition of the really ironic, shitty, lo-fi quality, but putting these really meaningful statements that really impacted me as a woman in a relationship with some of my past experiences. So I put a compilation of maybe 19 different phrases that men have told me that have impacted me in different ways. Some of them are really obvious and some of them are more vague. And maybe people have to think about it, but that was my first experiment with putting out an art book that was by an artist in SoCal that isn't necessarily professional, me. And
you're professional,
right? But I
sorry to break it to you.
Well, that's my I'm constantly denying it. I'm like, no, I'm also like indie and no one knows who I am, but more people know who I am now than I'm used to.
Sure.
Anyway,
well,
so
yeah.
So that's the first project. Eyesore is my first produced art book that's in print in perfect binding in a professional manner for sale.
Where can people? Where are Curious and the artist publications available?
So our full catalog of artist books and publications is available at the Artlands. It's a small gallery store in Redlands, in downtown Redlands. Right next to the Vault. It's a really well-known bar in that area.
Okay.
And also everything's available on our online store at curiouspublishing.org. And the actual magazine is available at a studio called Inland Mujeres in Riverside. It's an art studio and workshop space for artists. Also, Skylight Books is the most recent place that we've sent Curious Magazine, so they'll get it every season.
Oh, cool. And how many issues are they?
I send them 5.
5? Okay.
Yeah, so that's their starting point for magazines.
That's
But
awesome.
it's really exciting. It's the first like big bookstore that I got into.
Yeah. Skylight. I used to live down the street from Skylight.
Also, Shop Called Quest. Shop Called Quest is a small art book and comic book store in Claremont. There's also one in Redlands in LA, but I'm in the Claremont one and working on getting into the Redlands one.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then coming up, it's not available yet, but I've already sent them magazines, which is going to open in the next 2 months, called Eightfold Coffee off of Sunset in LA. And they're going to have a small project bookstore that's curated for people to be able to purchase Curious Magazine. It's going to be called Folding Days. So that's exciting.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not bad for
Not too shabby.
a little over a year.
Yeah.
Right? That's pretty
Less technically.
Technically, well, we've been founded for a little over a year,
That's
but
true.
the first publication came out last year in September.
And when will the 5th issue come out?
So I actually took your advice with the volumes. Volume 2, issue 1.
Don't blame me.
No, I thought it was good.
I was
So,
I was having to. I
So
make jokes like this.
the
all
fifth
time.
the 5th ever magazine, which will be called Volume 2, issue 1, is the anniversary issue, and I'm gonna do a re-examination of Millennial Pink. That'll come out in September.
Oh wow. Okay. So so the 5th issue will be volume 2, issue 1. So you're going to start over every.
Yes.
So you'll be doing that every year then.
Yeah.
So now you have to get to a lot of volumes.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh
cool.
no, what am I gonna do?
And what is your? Do you have like a dream for where this is going, or like a goal in mind, or some kind of like thought of what you would like to become, or are you just taking it as it comes?
A little bit of both. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to make sure that I'm putting the right amount of care into every issue that I can, and not work completely beyond my means, but always a little bit beyond my means so that I can grow.
Yeah.
But I don't want to overwhelm myself. But honestly, I'm hoping that this replaces one of my many jobs. You know, in a personal way. I'm like, I want this to be my career.
Yeah, because you do this right now, but just because you love it, which is why you should get started in any kind of creative endeavor. But like many creatives, also you would like it to pull its own weight
Right.
a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's inevitable in time, just from the growth that's been happening recently, the interest I've been getting in it, the help that I'm getting with interns, and I just think it's only a matter of time before I can hire myself on and hire maybe a couple of other artists on professionally to get a paycheck from it, and from there just throwing bigger release parties and keeping it humble, but also, very diverse.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sam, do you have anything?
I think you about covered it, really.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for driving all the way down to my studio and
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure.
letting me try this experiment.
Thanks for having me
And
here.
hope it doesn't suck.
If it does, we'll just talk again.
Yeah, so
Right.
we'll try it again. But anyway, thanks Rebecca, thanks Sam.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to hearing about the next issue when it's